supposed to continue with the same progressive policies and who use the platform of what we call the citizen revolution to win the election, won the election. That's to say, the government didn't lose the election. We won the election. But in a very, very unique case, I have not seen that anywhere else. I know that the politicians say things in order to win an election and then later might do different things. But this was a complete shift, 180 degrees shift. It's like we are in the UK now, and let's just imagine that in the last elections, Mr. Boris Johnson won the election with overwhelming majority, and suddenly in the next weeks he says, look, I just think that the manifesto of the opposition is better actually, and we are not going to have Brexit now, we're going to have a referendum and all that. Complete change.
And to be clear for the viewers, Julian Assange was granted his Ecuadorian asylum and citizenship under President Rafael Correa. There was a change in government, and then Lenin Moreno came into power, and that is who you were referring to. Lenin Moreno promised to continue on with the same sort of more left-leaning policies that Rafael Correa had instilled. Instead, he completely shifted his stance, and it was under Lenin Moreno's administration that Assange, his asylum and his citizenship was revoked.
Yeah, with a small correction there. The citizenship was granted in the beginning of Lenin Moreno's government. That was probably the last genuine protection effort coming from Ecuador. But in 2018, the change was radical, and we now know, we didn't know at the time, we now know that from March 2018, Ecuador had already signed what we call a mutual judicial cooperation agreement with the United States. And the United States got access to investigate Julian, even though he was enjoying political asylum, that is protection. So basically, the country that was protecting him agreed with the persecutors to investigate the protected person, which is illegal and immoral. And that was the beginning of the end of the asylum, in my opinion, because many people probably don't know, but the last year, I wasn't in the last year in the embassy. All the diplomats were changed, and especially myself, I was very close to Julian. I was not welcome anymore for the new government. But protection became in harassment. They tried to do everything possible to force Julian to leave the embassy at his own will, his own accord. They tried to break him down. They isolated him. They uncommunicated him. They cut the internet. They even went to the extreme to install inhibition equipment in order to so he cannot use mobile phones, and he banned him visitors. So it was complete uncommunication. They didn't break him. He didn't leave the embassy at his own accord. But the cooperation with the Americans and with the British reached the point that they agreed on his handing over, and that's why he's fighting now in courts the extradition.
Right, and in the last year, while living in the embassy, it was March of 2018 that the internet access was cut off within the Ecuadorian embassy. So Assange had virtually no contact with the outside world. So that's been something that we've spoken about quite a bit tonight, was that during that last year in the embassy, the conditions really got worse and gradually continued to get worse even prior to that. Demond, I do want to bring you in on here. What is your perspective on some of the information that Fidel was discussing? It seems that the United States continuously has a lot of power and control over other countries, and many of these leaders in these countries are very much willing to work with the United States and to give in to their power.
Well, thanks for having me on first. And what I can say, I guess, coming from the United States, I can see the orbit that a lot of countries have when they they form their relationships to the U.S. So previously living in South Korea, visiting Japan, other places, and noticing that, there is a specific geopolitical interest and orbit that many of these countries have. Ecuador was pulled into that orbit, and then, later on, now they're being shifted away from their original intent, their original, trajectory. They don't have the sovereignty that they had in the past now. Now they're just merely a puppet of the U.S. empire. And for me, watching the whole Assange case come out and how he's being treated, how they revoked his citizenship, how they revoked his asylum, to me, that was something that was telling about how it's important for many of these countries to secure their sovereignty, keeping in leaders that are important to the will of the people living there. I guess that's what I can say about that. I guess going deeper into Assange, I think that it's important that people fight with everything that they've got to protect this. This is the last bastion of freedom and democracy. And if that goes, then basically it's free game. He will be the first example. There will be more set after that. And so that's why I think everyone's coming together, for this week, if not long before and long after, this trial takes place.
Right. It's really important that the UK does not kind of fall into the same trap that Ecuador has, or not same trap, but kind of mimic the same actions as in give in to the US again. It's really important that the UK, in this case, steps up and prevents this extradition. And that also goes to people on the ground really showing their support for Assange, which we saw at the march on Saturday. But I do want to get to some of the specifics about court and what we learned today. I know we discussed it on the earlier stream, but I think it's important that we kind of reiterate what we learned and where we're headed from here. And Tarek, I know that you were in the courtroom this entire week.
Sure. So like I said earlier, we had the kind of continuation of the United States prosecution trying to lay out why there should not be any political exemptions for political crimes. So they made this argument that because there is no exception for political crimes in the 2003 Extradition Act of the United Kingdom, that there should be that shouldn't be considered in Julian's hearings. Obviously, for those that can follow logic, it's very apparent that it doesn't make any sense to have an extradition request based on a treaty and then not kind of depend on one of the main protections defined within the treaty. And I think we kind of touched on this point earlier in the day, but it was very telling of how the United States prosecution was giving this argument, which was essentially nonsensical, but they didn't receive any particular pushback from the judge in question. But then when the defense of Julian Assange mentioned, that was trying to defend the inclusion of human rights protections and the protections under the European Convention of Human Rights under Article 5, the judge accused the defense of trying to use circular reasoning to say, how can you try to argue that that we should be having protections under the. It's almost strange of how should we be having protections under the Human Rights Code, or because this is outside of the UK law. But she didn't put any pushback towards the United States prosecution side of things, of saying, what they're essentially doing is we're relying on this extradition treaty to request the extradition of Julian Assange, but we are arguing at the same time that Article 4 protection does not apply. So that was the first part of the day. The second part of the day was, like we mentioned, about the some of the conditions that Julian is in, and particularly the issues of, I guess, client-attorney privilege. So we kind of had maybe outbursts, not the correct word, but we had Julian stand up in court and complain about the lack of confidential access to his lawyers, amongst other things. They made a petition or appeal today to have Julian...
Sorry, Tarek, the stream's frozen again.
Bloody CIA!
Good idea.